Once we have extracted the metal from its ore by the process of reduction, we are going to refine the metal. First method for refining of metal is liquation. This method is based on the principle that it is used for metals which have very low melting points. This method is used for refining the metals which are easily fusible, that is, which melt easily. For example, metals like tin, lead, bismuth, and many more. Liquation is done on a sloping hearth, somewhat like this. On the top of the hearth, the crude metal is placed and it is then heated. Because I've already mentioned this fact that here the metal has very low melting point as compared to the impurities present in it, the metal will melt, flow down the hearth, and it will be collected in the container which is kept at the bottom. While the impurities, because they have high melting point comparatively, they will remain on the top only and they won't fuse and will flow down. Second method for refining is distillation. Distillation is used for the refining of metals which have low boiling points, that is, which are volatile in nature, while the impurities present in the crude metal are the one which have high boiling points which do not vaporize easily. This method can be adopted for the refining of metals like mercury, very importantly, zinc, cadmium, etc. Distillation is done in an apparatus called retort, which is a round bottom flask with a curved neck, somewhat like this. It is connected to a container. The crude metal is placed in the flask, in the retort. It is heated. The metal being a volatile metal, it has low boiling point. It will vaporize. The vapors will travel through the neck, which is comparatively cooler. It will condense, the metal will condense back into liquid, and it will be collected in the container which is connected to the neck of retort. While the impurities, because they will remain in the solid state, they will be separated from the metal. But in comparison to these two methods, liquation and distillation, the most common, the most widely used, the most important and most significant beneficial method is electrolytic refining. This is the most general and widely used method for refining of impure metals, and almost all metals can be refined, they can be purified by this method. For example, metals like copper, silver, zinc, tin, nickel, gold, etc. As the name itself says, electrolytic refining, definitely this method is based upon the phenomenon of electrolysis. Now, when we talk about electrolysis, there are two basic necessities for this process. One is the electrolyte, the other is the electrode. So two basic necessities, electrolyte and electrodes. Whenever we are electrolyzing, maybe electrolytic reduction, maybe electrolytic refining, or whatever, if the process is based on the phenomenon of electrolysis, there has to be an electrolyte which should be a good conductor of electricity, through which the electricity can be passed, it can be flowed. And the second necessity is electrodes. Electrodes are cathode and anode. And in an electrolytic cell, cathode is negatively charged electrode, anode is positively charged electrode. Now, talking about electrolytic refining, in case of electrolytic refining, cathode is made as a thin strip or a thin rod of pure metal, while anode is a thick strip or a thick rod of impure metal, the metal to be purified, the crude metal that has been extracted in the previous step. And the electrolyte is a salt solution of the metal to be purified. Right? Let's understand this with a very common example of copper. Suppose we have to refine copper by electrolytic refining. So in this case, cathode will be a thin strip of copper but in the pure form, and anode will be a thick strip of crude copper, the copper which has been extracted, which has to be refined. And the electrolyte will be a solution of a salt of copper like copper sulfate, CuSO4. Now this electrolytic refining process will be carried out in an electrolytic tank. So let's say this is an electrolytic tank, and in this is a thick strip, so it will be made anode, positively charged, it will be attached to the positive terminal of the battery, and a thin strip, this will be made cathode, this will be attached to negative terminal of battery, and the tank will be filled with the electrolyte, which in this case is copper sulfate, solution of copper sulfate. This anode is of impure copper and cathode is of pure copper. Now once this setup is complete, cathode, anode, electrolyte all has been arranged, then electricity will start flowing. And this should be remembered that during the process of electrolysis, whether it is of copper or any other metal or any other substance, at cathode reduction occurs, here reduction will occur, and at anode oxidation will occur. Oxidation refers to the loss of electrons, reduction refers to the gain of electrons. Now in this case, at anode oxidation will occur. Anode is made up of copper, impure copper. So copper will lose electrons, it will get converted into copper ion. Now these copper ions will move from anode into the solution, and from the solution they will be attracted towards the negatively charged electrode, that is cathode. So at cathode, these copper ions will get reduced, they will gain electrons, and they will be converted into pure copper metal, which will then start depositing on cathode. Right? I hope now you are able to understand why cathode is made thin and anode is made thick, because during the process of electrolysis the impure metal is being refined. So anode is being consumed during the process, it will grow thinner and thinner as the process proceeds, and cathode will, due to the deposition of pure metal, it will start increasing in diameter. So from thin it will change to a thick strip of pure metal. We cannot change this, although we can, but if we'll change, we'll reverse the situation, then the process of electrolysis will not proceed to a very longer extent. After some time it will stop, because anode will be consumed completely and the circuit will be discontinued. Now what will happen to the impurities present in the impure metal? If the impurities are soluble in the solution, they'll get dissolved in the electrolyte, and if in case they are insoluble, they will start falling down from anode and they will start depositing below anode. So the insoluble impurities will start depositing somewhat like this, and we will call these impurities as anode mud. Mud because they are impurities, and anode mud because they are falling down below anode. Now one thing which is very important in this example is that in case of copper, this anode mud contains some very precious metals like gold, silver, platinum. And these precious metals are further extracted from anode mud. Although these are present in very small amounts and these are present as impurities in the metal, our primary metal will be copper, but still anode mud is not considered as a waste byproduct or as a waste material, and further the metallurgy of these metals is carried out and they are extracted from anode mud. So this was the electrolytic refining, which is the most common method for metals. And there are some other methods apart from these which are used to obtain metals of very high purity. If we need to use a metal in an application where its purity is very significant, where it has to be very pure, ultra pure, then in that case there some other methods are used. For example, Van Arkel method, and the other one is zone refining. These are the methods which are used to obtain ultra pure metals, that is, metals of very high purity. For example, titanium. Titanium is one of the strategic metals. It plays a very important role in deciding the economy and in the defense of the country. It is used in space technology, and so it has to be of very high purity, and it is purified by Van Arkel method. For zone refining, semiconductors, metals like silicon, germanium, in fact these are metalloids, they are purified by zone refining. Corrosion of metals. So we've completed metallurgy and we are now going to start corrosion of metals. Now why am I relating the two, metallurgy and corrosion? There's a reason for it. Both these terms, both these phenomena are opposite to each other. In metallurgy, we extract metal from its combined state, which is called mineral or ore, which occurs in the earth's crust. So in metallurgy we are extracting the metal from its compounds, while in corrosion the reverse happens. Metal gets converted, gets transformed into one of its compounds, maybe hydroxide, maybe carbonate or oxide or sulfide, or maybe any other form. So these two phenomena, these two processes are opposite to each other. When we talk about corrosion, the most importantly, corrosion is the term is used in reference to iron, where this corrosion of iron is called rusting. So everybody of us, each one of us, have heard the term rusting. We have encountered rusting in our day-to-day life, so we are well aware of what rusting is. So talking about corrosion, surface of many metals is easily attacked when exposed to atmosphere. They react with air or water present in the environment and form undesirable compounds on their surfaces. These undesirable compounds are most commonly, they are oxides, but apart from oxide, they can be carbonate or they can be sulfide also. So we can define corrosion as the process of deterioration of metal as a result of reaction with its surroundings. So when I'm saying surroundings, I particularly refer to moisture, water present in atmosphere, and oxygen. So in other words, we can say that when a metal is exposed to damp air, it gets corroded, and this phenomena, this process, corrosion, it actually occurs on the metal surface. So it is a surface phenomena. This is very important to note, that corrosion is a surface phenomena. Now taking on the most common example of corrosion, that is rusting. Iron corrodes readily when exposed to moisture and gets covered with a brown flaky substance called rust. So iron, which is in the form of any article, it reacts with oxygen and moisture present in air and turns into its oxide. In fact, I should say it's hydrated oxide. So this is a chemical representation and equation of rusting. Fe2O3.xH2O. This is the chemical nature of rust. And the reason I've written X here is the fact that the amount of moisture, the amount of water vapor in atmosphere will vary from place to place. For example, in coastal areas like Mumbai, there the rate of rusting will be higher than an interior or a plain like Rajasthan. So this is chemically rust. It is brown in color and it is flaky in nature. This is very important. Flaky means it does not adhere to the underlying metal, but it keeps on being removed from the surface. So that is why it is not protecting in nature. In fact, it gets removed and the underlying metal again it gets exposed to atmosphere, and the process of corrosion or the process of rusting continues till the metal is damaged completely. So rusting, or we can say corrosion, it's a redox reaction, but in this case the metal, for example in rusting, iron undergoes oxidation. It turns into an oxide. So during the process of rusting or during the process of corrosion, metal is oxidized. Right? So we can describe two necessary conditions for rusting. One is the presence of oxygen and the other one is the presence of moisture or the presence of water. These two are the necessary conditions for rusting, and the favorable conditions are the presence of impurities in the atmosphere. If the atmosphere is polluted, if the air is polluted, the process of rusting fastens. Also, if there are any pits or depressions on the surface of metal, then also they enhance the process of rusting. We can carry out a very simple experiment to show that oxygen and water both are required for rusting, both are the necessary conditions for rusting. And for this we will take three test tubes. Test tube A, test tube B and test tube C. In test tube A, we will put an iron nail along with anhydrous calcium chloride, CaCl2, and we will cork this test tube. In test tube B, we will put an iron nail, boiled water, not normal water, this is boiled water, and we will cover the surface of water with a layer of oil. We can use any oil here, there is no particular oil being used. So this is a layer of oil, and again we will cork this tube. In test tube C, we will put the iron nail, simple plain water, normal water, and we will cork this test tube also. We will keep these test tubes for a period of say 1 week or maybe 15 days, and after this span of time we will observe the iron nails kept in all the three test tubes. What we will observe is, in test tube A and B, in both these test tubes, iron nail will not be rusted, But in the third case, in test tube C, the nail will be rusted. Now we can very easily understand the reason for these observations. In test tube A, we have kept the iron nail in contact with anhydrous calcium chloride. Now this anhydrous calcium chloride, because it itself is anhydrous, what it will do is it will absorb moisture from the air which is present in the test tube. So in test tube A, the nail will be in contact with dry air. So it will get oxygen, but there will be no water in test tube A. In test tube B, we have put iron nail in boiled water. Boiled water lacks oxygen. Because when water is boiled, dissolved oxygen, it escapes and water gets free from oxygen. Moreover, we've covered the water with oil, which will further prevent the dissolution of oxygen from atmosphere into the water. So in this case, nail is in contact with only and only water, there is no oxygen. While in the third case, we put simple plain normal water which will contain dissolved oxygen in it. So in this case, the nail will get oxygen as well as water, both the conditions, and that is why rusting will occur in the iron nail which is put in the test tube C. So by this example, we can very easily prove that both these conditions, the presence of oxygen and the presence of water, are required. They are the necessary conditions for rusting or for corrosion. Now, as I've already mentioned that rusting is harmful. It deteriorates the metal completely. It will destroy the metal completely because rust is flaky in nature. It keeps on getting removed from the metal surface, exposing the underlying metal further to rusting. That is why what we need to do is we need to prevent rusting. So prevention of rusting. The most common method for preventing rusting is painting or oiling or greasing or maybe varnishing. Now because rusting is a surface phenomena, if we are able to prevent the exposure of metal surface to its surrounding, we can prevent rusting. So all these methods, painting, oiling, greasing and varnishing, are the methods which will cover the metal surface and they will prevent the exposure of metal surface to its surrounding, thereby preventing rusting. The other methods for preventing rusting are